Welcome to the Poetic Resurrection Podcast, where we explore perceptions. How self-reflecting questions can give you a better understanding of self. I'm your host, Sonia Iris Lozada. Stay tuned. Alex Greenwood is an award-winning writer, public relations consultant, podcaster, speaker, and former journalist. He is best known as the author of the John Pilate Mysteries and host and producer of the Mysterious Goings On podcast and the PR After Hours podcast. Alex has recorded hundreds of hours of podcasts and made hundreds of appearances on TV, radio, podcast webinars, and at conferences. Welcome. This week's episode, we have Alex Greenwood, who is an award-winning writer of mysteries. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sonia. How are you?
I'm doing great. For those of you that don't know, I was on Alex's podcast, and we had so much fun on the podcast that I had to have him on my podcast. And we're going to cover like the soul of mystery, because as a writer, a lot of it comes from within you, like a passion or a drawing to it. What made you go into mysteries?
What made me go into mysteries, though? That's a good question. I've always enjoyed mysteries since I was little. I've enjoyed them. I've enjoyed the aesthetic. I blame the Late Show when I was 11 or 12. When I would stay up late, we had a large family in a small house, so I would wait till everybody else was asleep just to have some time to myself. And one of the things I would do is watch the Late Show. And where I lived, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, yes, that great cosmopolitan place, they had the Late Show. They had the Thin Man series, which was based on Dashiell Hammett's mystery books. And this is so funny, my first crush was on Myrna Loy.
I love that series. I used to be so addicted to the Thin Man series.
It's so great. And I always wanted, I always thought, well, if I ever got around to writing my own thing, I wanted it to be like that, where there was a mystery, but the mystery to me is almost ancillary to what's going on, because it's really more about this great couple, these characters who get along so well together, and they have fun, and the dialogue is just back and forth, and really good. So that's what I always wanted to do. But I've always been attracted to the mysteries within ourselves. And I think that a good mystery novel, a good thriller even, is often a metaphor for the mystery within ourselves, the mystery within our own hearts. And that's one thing I like to explore in my series, the John Pilate Mysteries, is there are mysteries. Nobody has told me that they were the toughest thing to figure out before the end. They've never said that. But what they've always said was they were very attracted to the characters and the way they're exploring, as I said, the mysteries within their own hearts. They're looking into the mysteries of damage done in their lives to them and how they get through life with those scars in place. And so I think that's one of the major things that attracted me to mysteries. That and they're just fun,
I love reading mysteries. I just don't know how to write mysteries. To me, it seems like you have to there's a web you weave that, to take someone on a ride. And that's something that's difficult for me to do as a writer. I could be very blunt and just tell you what's going on. But I find it fascinating to be able to write mysteries.
There is an art to it in the sense that, you've got to leave this trail of breadcrumbs for the reader all the way. And you've got to have and when you do a series, beyond the breadcrumbs, if I could torch the metaphor a little further, you have to have little Easter eggs to call back to previous books without making them critical to somebody who just picked up, say, book 7 of my series and wants to enjoy it. Nothing worse than getting in the middle of a series and that tells you don't have to read the previous 6, but you get into it and you realize I need to read the previous 6. So I have to really work on that, right? So, but this trail of breadcrumbs, like right now, I'm finishing up book 8. It's about 2 more weeks. It's going to my editor, and what I've been doing now is going back through it and making sure that the outcome is properly not telegraphed, but the reader has to, when they're finished, have to look back and go, oh, okay, I remember that guy did that thing with the other thing, and she did the thing, right? Yeah, now I get that. You got to do that. To me, though, that's how I have to do it, Sonia. I just have to get I always say is get the clay on the table, and then I start shaping it like a sculptor would. And then by the time I'm done with my kind of hideous bust of somebody, then I realize, okay, now I have to go back and really make that bust pretty. So I have to go back and say, okay, and drop little breadcrumbs, as I said, and then for fun, for the readers who are with me and loyal to the series, make sure the Easter eggs are there for fan service too.
Right, because you have to service your previous readers, because I find that in general, like in life, it seems like everybody goes for the new reader or the new thing or new customers, or and they just forget about their fan base. They do nothing for them. I feel businesses run that way. So for you to leave those little breadcrumbs for the readers that have been with you for so long, I think it's a wonderful thing. Do you want to discuss how you came into writing the series?
I can if you'd like. Sure.
Yes.
I'll try and keep this story short. And any of my crossover listeners from Mysterious Goings On, where we first met you, Sonia, who, by the way, just and I mean this sincerely. I feel like you and I became friends on that little
Yes.
hour together, and I'm very flattered to be here with you on this. And I've been looking forward to this for weeks. So I'm very
Yeah.
glad.
Ditto.
Okay. Well, so let me take you on a quick story here. Ugh, okay, Alex, make it quick. Okay, my editor's not here, so I'll do my best. All right. I mentioned that I spent about the first 34, 35 years of my life in Oklahoma City, more or less. And long story short, I was leaving to take a job in Nebraska, and it was at a very tiny. It was the oldest college in Nebraska. It's very tiny. I mean, less than 1,000, fewer than 1,000 students. I was going to be director of marketing and PR, and I went up there. Okay, I get up there. It's going great. It's a culture shock, even though Oklahoma City is not exactly LA. It's way bigger than 1,000 people. It's about a half
Yeah.
million people. I get there, and one day I go into my office, and there's this big fat manila envelope on the desk. I mean, just really stuffed. And I open it up, and there's a little sticky note on the outside. It's from my boss, the president. I answered directly to the president of the college, and he said, "We get calls about this from time to time. Be familiar with it." And I'm like, okay. I pull all this stuff out. Crime scene photos, affidavits of people who witnessed a murder, autopsy, all of this stuff, news clippings. Turned out at that time, about 50 years earlier, this college I worked at, Peru State College in Peru, Nebraska, probably the site of probably the first. This is dubious, and they hate me for bringing this up. I know, because I used to be the PR guy, but they're probably the first school shooting. And what happened is that one of their professors who was up for tenure, Barney Baker, was denied tenure. He was apparently a troubled soul, and they just realized that maybe not good for tenure. Let's move him on. One day he snapped. He got dressed. He walked across campus. He went into his boss, the dean's office, shot him in the head. Then he walked upstairs, calmly past other people, went to the president's office, shot him in the head, calmly left. He just walked out with the gun in hand. Nobody got near him. He didn't shoot anybody else. He didn't threaten anybody else. He was actually pleasant to other people. Went back to his home and took his own life. Well,
Wow.
yeah, that's so you look at that, and of course, here I am. Oh, here I am, the ultimate fish out of water already. Didn't know a soul there. I mean, the closest thing I had to a friend was my boss, who was the president of the school, who, and this is like for another conversation, turned out to not be my friend. But anyway, so I always just I went through and read all that stuff, and then I just made a photocopy of everything for myself. And I thought someday I might want to do something with this. So I tucked it away, and a couple of years later, I left there, and I moved to Kansas City, and I was in my apartment one night, and I am the grandson of a guy who wrote westerns and historical fiction for 50 years. And
Oh, really?
yeah, my grandpa, I loved him. And he had passed a few years earlier. And he'd always told me, "You're talented. You can write. You should write." And I thought, this is what I'm going to write about. So what I did, I took that incident from 50 years ago at Peru State College, and I fictionalized it. I created a whole new town. Instead of Peru, Nebraska, it's Cross Township. And I changed all the names, and I changed stuff up. And the lead character is the guy who came in from a big town to take a job, who had just gotten divorced. He was broke. He was down on his heels, the whole thing, which was not very imaginative, because that's frankly pretty close to where I was. And I had him go there and stumble into a mystery. Without giving it away, the book is called Pilate's Cross, because his name is John Pilate, like Pontius Pilate, the guy who washes his hands after delivering up Jesus and all that. Pilate's Cross and Cross Township, but also I viewed it cross as like a crossroads, because this is a guy at a crossroads in his life. There's a lot of other little allegorical things. Sharp readers will notice that there's a lot of threes in this book, because if you think about the biblical, there's threes everywhere, and Father, Son, Holy Ghost.
Exactly.
There's all kinds of stuff, right? And he's also technically at kind of a Gethsemane in his life. By the way, and this is not like a big religious book. That's about as far as it goes in religion. Most of the time, most people who meet him confuse his name with Pilates. They think he's an exercise guy.
That's true. I think they spell the same.
They spell exactly the same. There's just no S on it. But if it's apostrophe S, I've seen this all the time. It's, Pilates cross. Oh, I got to get that book. Pilates key. Pilates ghost. I don't understand how that works, but all right. I'm like, it's Pilate. I was just interviewed by a gentleman in Liverpool a couple of weeks ago, and he introduced me that way, and he said that, and I didn't say a word. I just waited until he said, ask me about, talk to me about your books, and I just said it properly. And then I could see him. He was embarrassed. I said, listen, you just helped me, because every book, there's like at least one person who does that, and it's just the lead character just rolls his eyes and just deals with it, So that became the book, and I thought it would just be a one-off book, and that came out, 12 years ago. But people liked it. And I'm not saying I sold thousands of copies. I didn't. But enough people in my circle read it and said, you should keep going. And I thought, I like these characters. I want to keep going. So I created the next book, Pilate's Key, which has our hero getting out of the snowy wasteland of Nebraska and going to Key West, Florida. So I kind of changed the setting. And then the rest, without going too much deeper, the rest of the series alternates between Nebraska and Key West. Because I thought, wow, they're both small towns. Key West is tiny, but millions of people go through there every year. Mm-hmm. Cross Township is tiny, but it's two tiny towns in two different places, and it also reflects the duality of my character, John Pilate, who, and I'll have to add one last thing, okay, Sonia, and then I'll stop talking about this, is John Pilate has an alter ego, or is it an alter ego, or is it a doppelganger named Simon, who is constantly kibitzing. He might be John Pilate's id, he might be a ghost, who knows? You have to read the books and find out, but he is constantly with him and basically saying, you piece of crap, you're not going to get out of this alive. What are you doing? You're stupid, all this stuff. And he's around throughout the entire series as well. So there you go.
I like the idea of the I can't say the word doppelganger. How do you say
Doppelganger.
it? Doppelganger. Okay.
One of those great German words. Doppelganger.
Oh, and I just love that idea of that as being in two places at the same time. It's fascinating to me.
See, I figured you would like that.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, now I want to go out and buy your books.
I think, you know what? I'm going to send you some, so don't even go buy. I'd love you to, but I got to remember to send these to you, the first couple. Yeah, there's that. So, and that's the thing, Sonia, that I love about this too, is I kind of call it a quirky mystery. It's not really it is a cozy mystery, just if you had to find a place, but it's a quirky mystery is what I call it. And one thing that I really like about this, and that I think this might appeal to you as well, considering how you feel about time, and I love that discussion you and I had. And by the way, we should put the link, and I'm telling you how to do your show now. Here we go. We should put the link to your conversation with me in the show notes for this one, because people should hear that. What you said was so brilliant.
Oh, no. Okay. I will definitely do that. And you could do the same with this. I will do the exchange, because you know what? You're like one of the most favorite people I have met while doing podcasting. I got to keep in touch. We got to do more podcasting stuff together. The writing and going back to the soul of it. When you read a mystery and you can identify with it, like I love mysteries, but I don't like blood and gut mysteries. I start reading something so violent and I can't. I've had some people ask me if they could be on the show, and their book is violent. It's just not me, and it's not what the podcast is about. And even though they were very nice, and actually I read some of it, it was very well written, but it just doesn't fit the show. In fact, I think I referred them to you.
Well, I take just about anybody who can spell.
Yeah. Well, this guy really wrote well, so he's probably on your list. It's a good story.
Well, I'm not going to lie to you. There is some violence, just kind of, but mine is probably more on the level of Agatha Christie style. There is a murder, okay, but I don't really go into
blood and guts,
gore, and I don't luxuriate in cruelty much. Although I will say this, I will tell you, let me confessional time here. It's just you and me here, right? Nobody can hear us. Okay, great. Book 3,
this is why I love this guy.
It's mutual. Book 3, Pilate's Ghost. I did this scene that's protracted, and it's a fight with a guy, our hero, who's not a fighter by any means, but he's literally having to with his fists fight for his life. And it goes on so well. I had a reader who goes, buddy, what is this? This scene, it's so long and he's fighting. And I was like, well, I want to explain, how tired he is and how overmatched he is. And he's like, I think I got it in the first 2 pages.
How,
Well, I'm
how
not
long
gonna.
is it?
It's pretty long, it's a few pages, but just to say, but it's also, what it also is, Tony. It's just me. It's just me exploring the form, and it's exploring writing different styles. Because one thing I like to do, as I mentioned earlier, we talk about the time travel aspects of everything and things I find so incredibly interesting about what you're doing in your work. But in this series, I got to about book 4, and I didn't feel another book coming on, but I thought there's 4 books worth of characters who I think are like family to me because I made them, but they're like family to me. And I thought, how about this? How about I write a book of short stories where I focus not at John Pilate at all? He's mentioned, he's tangential, but I starring the supporting characters, giving them their backstory, maybe their future. And I created, it's called Pilate 7, and it's 7 short stories about 7 people besides John Pilate, but they're pilots because they're part of his world.
Yeah.
And I got more acclaim, nomination for an award. I got more people telling me that they just thought this is so new and so different to do something like this. But like I think the last story potentially is a potential future for John Pilate, right? But it's told from the perspective, I mean, in the series, he's got a little boy. It's told from the perspective of his little boy being an adult, talking about his father who's now a recluse somewhere. John Pilate is.
Really?
Yeah, but here's the thing. My buddy Jason McIntyre, great writer, he's out of Canada. He's one of the best thriller writers who's not been discovered by mass media yet, but his day will come. He told me, he said he's always been a friend and he enjoyed the books, but he said when he read that, he said, this is when I realized, you're up there and you can do things. And it made me feel so good. But do you know why I think that book works? It's just because I was no longer self-conscious. I decided this is my world I created. I can do whatever I want. If people don't want to read it, they don't have to. And I've tried to keep that with me going forward. Like it used to be, if my dear friend Sonia said, if there's violence in it, I'm not going to read it. So then I might censor myself, even though it might help the story to have a lot of bad, violence in it. Well, I'm not going to do that anymore. You know what I'm saying? Going forward, I had an uncle who read the first book and he said that sex scene was really out of bounds. And I'm like, I didn't think so. But
also, what era do they come from?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. Yeah. And so and I think if I understand you correctly, it's like, well, whatever my uncle found risque may mean nothing to me, a guy in his early 50s. But what may be violent to you may not be especially violent to me. So there's all those things. So I always tell other writers, this is just, you got to, it sounds so obvious, but you got to write for yourself. It's a lot like what you said about your poetry too. I ask you, I think, a lot of questions about that. And do you ever I don't remember the exact question, I'm sorry, but it's something along the lines of, does it ever make you feel kind of weird or exposed? And you just like, well, I have no other way to do this, basically.
And and that's how I got into poetry, was because, it's subjective. People right off the bat are either going to love it or hate it. There's very rarely a gray area with poetry.
It's so true.
I knew that going in. So it's like, well, I just wish I could write long form. Like my next book is going to have short stories in it because something's telling me to write more. So,
Good.
And I'm going to go to short stories. I don't have that mind that you have that can do an entire novel. To me, that seems like so overwhelming just to even think about it. So how do you deal with that?
You don't know that, first of all. You haven't really tried to do that. What if you started cranking on a short story and it just kept going and going? That's
true. I've done that where I said, I'm just going to write a flash story because I thought that was right up. And I ended up writing much more. Yeah.
I think that's what's going to happen with you.
You got to fill in the blanks more. I'm going to be teaching a class and I start out with, okay, let's do a simple line like I'm walking down the street.
Mm-hmm.
That means nothing, right?
Right.
But visualize yourself walking down the street and then you can feel it and take the mood and create more from that.
Right.
And so I'm assuming that's what I would have to do a novel.
Probably. I think people, I'm trying to reach back to, I probably was just foolhardy, but I could always hear my grandpa talking to me saying, you can do this. You're good at this. I mean, he didn't tell me I'm Hemingway. He just said, this was a guy who wrote mid-list Westerns. I mean, he won some awards and he had some good sales, but he wasn't rich and famous. But I didn't care. My grandpa telling me, I think, gave me a lot of the affirmation I needed. But the other part was I just probably didn't know any better. I think I just thought to myself, because I'd written back, my degree was kind of in professional writing in college. And I'd written some things then that I look back on now are pretty sad, but you have to go through that. You have to write a lot of. Yeah, unfortunately, you have to kind of, as Stephen King said, shovel blank from a sitting position for a long time before you finally get to the really good stuff, and that's just the way it goes. But what made me think I could do it? I don't know, other than just I wanted to do it. I say this all the time. I'll try anything once, and I'm pretty damn serious about that. I will try just about anything once, within reason. And I just thought, well. I told myself, let's see if you got what it takes. And it took me, I would imagine it took me about 6 or 8 months to write my first draft. But one thing I had going for me was that big stack of material that kind of gave me a crutch, because I could go back to so much stuff there. And I will tell you this is, I don't tell many people this, but again, nobody's listening but you and me, and we're tight, right? Okay. I actually took lines out of affidavits of people who actually witnessed the crimes and made them into dialogue. I took lines that were quoted in newspapers from the clippings and put them in there. Part of me was like, well, that's great, and that helped me move along. But it also helped me speak in the language, because I moved the killings up to 1963, and I made a parallel, like it was like right after JFK was assassinated. This college president was assassinated in my book, so I moved it up by about 15 years or something like that. But the point being, reading the affidavits and the news stories, I read how the cadence, how the characters, how people spoke back then. And it really helped me do that, because that all took place in the past. And then when the book becomes, when John Pilate shows up, he's there 45 years later or something. So anyway, I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but
No, this is very interesting to me. Go ahead.
Well, I think it was just, it gave me a crutch probably. And that's, but you know what happened right there, Sonia, when I went from Pilate's Cross and I got that done, and then I decided I'm going to dive into Pilate's Key, pardon the pun, because it's a Key West, I'll dive in. I had been to Key West, and I find it a very strange, interesting, weird place, and I thought, I'll just use a lot of what I picked up on, like on vacation there, I did like ghost tours, and I went to museums, I did all this stuff, and I had all of this in my data bank and stuff, and of course the internet's a blessing to every writer now. You can go back and refresh your memory and find stuff. But what I loved about that was I really didn't have much of a crutch, other than I had a setting that was different. And people were surprised. They thought, I remember a good friend of mine, she said, I really thought when that book came out, she said, I loved it, but I just kind of thought he was just going to be this guy in Nebraska for forever. And no offense to Nebraskans, who are the sweetest people ever. Oh, God, no.
You need to have some variety. And that is because I lived in Florida for a while. I went to Key West. And one of the things that I really remember is that when you're driving down the road, the trees meet in the middle. They're right. Like bridges. Do you remember? Yeah. And I always found that fascinating. I always thought I was going through a tunnel of trees, because there's so many of them that just touch like over the road.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true. And there's so many, Sonia, there's so many. I almost always want to tell people, this is bad. And you need to like tell me to stop it. Okay, here I go. Oh. I like the first book just fine. It's very expository, but it's also my first book. So it's my first book. I had a different editor who was okay. She's great. I don't mean she did a bad job. It's just she did the best she could with what I gave her. But don't get me wrong, I like the book, and I'm not down mouthing it, I promise. But the second one is the one that outsold all the others practically, and it's just more fun. It's a little more light. But I almost always want to tell people to start there, and then if they really like that book, go back to the first one, go from Key to Cross and all that, because the thing that I think about Key that really works for it is it's richly detailed about the setting, because like you said, you're noticing something right there, right, how the trees do that thing and create this arch or this tunnel, and I mean, I had everything from, you ever heard of Robert the Doll? No. Robert the Doll, it's a long story, I won't give you the whole story, but basically it was 100 years ago, it was a child's toy. And whenever something bad happened at the house, he would blame it on Robert the Doll. It was like about a 3-foot tall, cuddly doll, kind of interesting looking with this in a sailor suit. And he was always Robert. Well, long story short, a lot of weird stuff happened in the house that the kid kept referring to the doll and saying the doll did it. And then adults started seeing something later The kid wasn't even around, and the doll would move around. Weird stuff would happen. And the legend of the doll is now it's in a museum there. People go see him if they don't ask his permission to take a picture. They don't say, Robert, and I did this. I did this. I said, Robert, may I take your picture? Or Robert, I think you look great. Hi, Robert. I am not saying one bad word about you. All this stuff because people do. There's a whole wall in the East Martello Museum in Key West of people writing letters begging Robert to let him off the hook because they ridiculed him, said something nasty about him, said he looked bad, took his picture without asking his permission. It's a hoot. But think about what a rich tapestry, and you've been to Key West, there's all this crazy stuff and Civil War era stuff. And the man Count von Kassel, who was so in love about 100 years ago, literally, during the great influenza outbreak, or was it TB? No, it was TB. It was before that. He was so in love with this young woman. He was an older guy, and he was a little weird. And I mean, she was in like 20 or something. And long story short for that is she passed away from tuberculosis. And he had married her on her deathbed. She wanted to try and help her family by marrying this guy who had a few bucks. Well, let's just put it this way. They put her in the tomb, but she wasn't in the tomb very long. And she was eventually found in the bedroom of the Count, who had made many modifications to the body to make it not only presentable, but also useful for his needs.
Wow. And this is a true story?
Completely true story. And if you pick up Pilate's Key, like the beginning, I kind of touch on that and a couple of other little stories. And if you don't want to pick up my book, just Google Key West Count.
No, I want to get the mystery. I want the mystery behind it. To me, learning about history done in a fictional way has always made me research the actual happenings.
Me too. Same. Do you do this? You're an actress, of course.
Yes.
And you know the business so much better than us civilians who obviously haven't. Even though, I've kind of just had my toe in the water briefly, kind of on the edge. I was never in LA. You know that. Okay. But most of us, I think most people do this thing now. They get out their phone during a show and they'll look up IMDb or Wikipedia, right? And I went and checked you out. I've already done that. So anyway, it's just funny because,
I did the same thing with you.
Well, I don't have an IMDb or Wikipedia, so you must have been pretty disappointed. But what's interesting is I think that when I'm reading a book, and I read something like that too, and I get so excited when I come across a little nugget like that, because that's not what my book's about. That's just me painting the backdrop, right? Just like you'd mentioned the trees, right? I'm just painting the backdrop. Key West is a weird flipping place. That's what I'm trying to say, right?
Yes.
And I liken when he's flying into Key West, he's looking out and seeing all the little tiny little islands and atolls and all that. And he kind of likened it to, we had a bad sunburned skin he peeled off of himself, and it looked the same. So anyway, you have to read it. But I think that there's a lot of good writers who make it a point to offer something beyond the narrow frame that the characters are living in. I'm glad that you like that stuff too. I love it.
Me too, because you know what? It not only creates the backdrop, it creates the essence of what's going to happen and why it's there. You're going to go because the atmosphere and everything around you affects the character.
Right.
They come out with, it was hot and sweaty and, I had to go through the torture of this, or it was so cold that and you can feel it and you go on that ride with the character. And that's what I like about setting the atmosphere, setting the stage for that character.
I think so. Yeah, but one thing I won't do, and I don't do, I don't get overly. Okay. Now, this was not saying I'm as good as, but one person said you've got a kind of you said you're going for a Hemingway style, aren't you? I said, what do you mean? They said your sentences are generally short and to the point, and you don't waste a whole lot of time like painting the scene. I'm like, yeah, I try to just get in there and I try to whittle the sentences down to they're not overly complex, but one thing I don't do as part of that style that I'm shooting for, which is it's not just the facts ma'am style completely, but it's close. I don't go out of my way to describe what people are wearing. To this day, everybody who loves the series or likes the series and we talk about it, I always kind of curiously say, well, what actor would play John Pilate in your mind if it was a deal? And everybody has a different actor in mind because I don't tell you what he looks like. You think I do.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. You might know that his love interest in one book has blonde hair, brown eyes. Okay. You might know that he's I think the first book pushing 40, and he's attractive apparently because women flirt with him. But that's it, right? And I think the writers who are doing the whole J. Crew catalog and down to all that. I would rather have the characters. We talk about the soul of the mystery here. I'd rather have the soul of the character come out not through what they're wearing, but through what they're saying and what they're doing. To me, that's how the story comes. I think when we spoke last time, because I know you're working towards screenplays and things, and I've always tried to kind of write my books in a visual manner, almost like a screenplay. Not quite, but I think my books would probably translate okay to a screenplay simply because there's not a whole lot of expository stuff and descriptive stuff. I would rather you read the book and thought, well, of course, now, Sonia, if you read my book, you might look at John Pilate and go, well, oh, and you might think he looks like me because,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe not.
It's funny, but when you read a story, you put your own essence into it. It's like, what would you find attractive? What do you think this is? What do you envision what it could be. Like I've read some stories and then I see the movie. I'm like, wow, that was not at all what I envisioned.
Exactly. Hey, do you know one thing I get too? I hope they're not listening, but I'll just tell you. I've had a lot of I'm very good friends with a lot of my ex-girlfriends. Okay, that's it's not a big deal. It's okay, and in my world, that's fine and all that. Every one of them who's read a book is like, come on, tell the truth. That character, it's based on me, right? And you know what I always say, right? How did you know?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we do borrow from the people we know. I have a one-woman show that I have been working on forever and have never released. But I hear my mom's voice, and it's called The Adventures of the Yo-Yo Dieter. And even though I'm a poet and I can get really deep, I have a really weird sense of humor. And it's all about me dieting and how diets affect me. I mean, I have one called the cabbage soup diet, which is, yes, we know what that does to your digestive system. So that's as much as I'm saying. And it's called, and then mom calls. I don't even know how I got on that, but it's using what we know and little things in life, and people do influence us.
It's totally true. And I have a friend, a very close friend, who knew her, and I have an ex-wife, and he said, "Oh man, that's a lot like X," and I'm like, "No, I didn't write it like X." He says, "Well, it reads like X," and I'm like, "Ooh." But shit. You just do what you do, right? You what? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I said, "Oh shit."
Yeah, exactly. It's the oh shit moment because you're like, because I don't really want to talk to that person ever again. So I don't want to give her any reason to be mad at me. But if I did it, it was mostly subconsciously, But I will admit there is a character that's kind of similar that I realize now I probably did put a little bit in there, but not enough to get sued. I don't think. Knock on wood. I think that if they tried to sue me, I'd say, well, these first get me a movie deal, and then you can sue me, and I'd actually have some money out of these books, and then there you go. But I think I think that writers, I think the poets, I think that even talking about actors, tell me about this. You're an actor. Tell me this. Doesn't your brain, just in your daily interactions with people, file away tics, mannerisms, ways of speaking?
Oh, smiling? Definitely. Because you need it in your arsenal of acting. If someone says, oh, you have to play this really bitchy person, I'm going to think of someone that I know that's bitchy. I had to do voiceover and I needed a voice. You need to have like 5 different voices. And honestly, I only have like 3. I'm still working on 2 more. But my niece, when she was younger, she sounded like the exasperated child. Every time she would talk to you, she would go, and then I went and I did this, and then I went and did that. And she was always exasperated. It's like she couldn't catch her breath enough. So that's one of my characters. When I have to do a voiceover and someone was an exasperated child, that's mine.
I think when I spoke with you in our first interview, I think I saw like 3 of you, though. And they may not be separate voices you would use as voiceover, but I saw 3 aspects of your personality, I think. There's the very warm, funny person you're being right this second. But I like when you were recounting stories of when you were in Hollywood, stuff in Hollywood, there was another you, a different face, and just a slightly different timbre to your voice.
Yes.
And then there was this other side of you. Oh, maybe I shouldn't give this away, but I had mentioned something that was related to where you were born, and you're whole affect changed completely. And I was noting all of that. And it was really
Wow, you're
interesting to
very good
me.
at that.
Well, I just pay attention. I acted too. I wasn't that great, but I pay attention. And what I'm filing it away for, of course, is, for books and stuff.
Right.
But I think it's also interesting when you run across animated, interesting people who have like seasons to their moods, if that makes sense. And you were like 3 seasons in like 1 hour. It was really interesting.
Oh yeah, I remember one of the big things that when you made up this story about going down this place and going down that place, and then this happens, and it goes, "What would you write with then?" I go, "Oh, it's like Alice in Wonderland."
Boom. Yeah, when I had the dream, right? I was telling you about the dream.
Yes,
You just
yes.
boom. Yes, it's totally true.
There's so
Yeah.
there's so much in life that affects your soul and your essence and all of that you can write into. It's just majorly great material for a book,
Oh
for a
yeah.
story, for a poem. And it's such a great release to be able to use that information and let it out and share it with the world, And yes, there's going to be people that are not there because they got their own stories that block them from being able to go to a different area. And not that it's bad, but it just means they're in a different place.
Yeah.
So as a writer and an actor, I have to not take it personally anymore. Because God, if you take it
No.
personally, as much as you're rejected in acting, you're going to be a mess.
Yeah, you're not going to leave the house.
No.
It's funny. I think we talked about this last time, but I'll just repeat this. I've had friends pick, like we made new friends a few years ago, and I know one of them bought my first book and posted on Insta a picture of her reading it, and I was so touched. And then she never said another word about it. I don't think she finished it. I don't think she liked it, and I was kind of hurt by that. And then I realized, that this is not completely original to me, but your work is not for everybody. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. I think if you made me, tied me to a chair, a Clockwork Orange style, and made me watch Downton Abbey, I don't think that's the only way I'd probably watch it. Not because I have any problem with period dramas and drawing room dramas and that kind of thing. I'm just not in that place in my life where that interests me right now, and that's okay. But there's some people tell me flat out, I don't like mysteries, I don't like genre, I like blah. I've got a friend, and I mean, if NPR doesn't tell her to read it, or the New York Times bestseller list doesn't tell her to read it, she won't read it. She's that person. You know what I mean? She's got to talk about the it book, which is sad for us genre writers who are not going to get covered by NPR.
And then also a lot of that is backed up by huge publishers that pay for that. They pay,
Oh yeah.
they'll take out a huge ad on radio or TV. And if they take out a huge ad or print ad, that means that they say, okay, now you'll guarantee me an interview because I took out an ad.
Yeah, and they will never admit to that, but it happens all the time.
Yeah,
Well,
I've
and
worked
think
in
about this, like,
journalism. I worked in
yeah,
magazines and TV and radio, and that was like the thing.
same.
So you can't go by that. All they do is they buy thousands of dollars worth of advertising, and then they say, okay, now you have to give me the interview for the author or the movie or whatever that has to deal with that because you just
Right,
bought their advertising. And
right.
media relies on advertising or they don't survive. So I
Yeah,
totally understand the marketing part of it. But at the same time, you can't rely on that. I love to discover people that no one knows about.
yeah, yeah.
To me, it's like that's like, I've always been a little bit on the underground or the underdog.
The underdog. Yeah,
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 I always like,
yeah.
but people, yeah, like even bad advertising is true that it's good because if they really slander a writer, then I'm more curious to read why they're slandering it.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, well,
So they
that's
just
yeah.
sold me the book, you know. So that has to happen. I once saw a movie, and I'm not going to say which movie it is, but the press just tore this film apart, saying this one person ruined the entire film. And my friend and I were like, how could one person ruin an entire film? Come on, you can't. I saw the film and they were right.
But you bought a ticket.
I bought a ticket and I saw it, and my friend and I did, and then we like looked at each other, got out, and we go, wow, one person can really ruin a film.
Oh, I can think of several like that. I can think of several. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it happens. And no, I'm with you on that. I also like you see one that just to beat this dead horse a little bit more is like, well, CBS owns Simon and Schuster, so any author in Simon and Schuster's stable of any stature is going to get interviewed on the morning show or 60 Minutes or something like that. So, I think a lot of people aren't, I don't mean this in a bad way, but aren't sophisticated about how these things work. And so the general public is just like, oh, okay. Yeah, but that doesn't mean, by the way, also that I don't want to like say, well, if you're on the New York Times bestseller list, you're obviously probably a pretty good book if you're
Oh,
on there.
well,
But
yeah, you don't get on there just being bad. Yeah,
yeah,
all the publicity in the world is not going to make you a good writer. So,
well, there's exceptions, of course. 50 Shades of Grey and
well,
Twilight
that was
series.
became that's more like a cult classic.
It really is. I don't know.
Yeah, I
I,
did not
I
get into that.
did you read any of it?
I read some of it, and I'm like, it's just not for me.
Yeah. See.
I don't. My sister loved them. She read all these books like in one sitting. I'm like, they're like 300 pages a piece.
Yeah, and some of it they got clothes on.
Yeah, I didn't watch the movies either.
I didn't
It's
know. No.
no, it's not to say just because people don't watch something or read something, it's not to say that it's bad. It's just not their
Right.
style. There's a lot of amazing movies and TV shows out there that I'm not interested in the plots. I'm not interested in the storylines.
Yeah.
I have to be in the mood. One of the things I do as an actor is we get sent the DVDs or we get passes for streaming them online so that we can vote for the SAG Awards.
Hmm.
And some of them I'm like, okay, I really need to watch this so I could vote, but I know it's not my style and it's going to be really violent. I'll watch the first half hour of it because all the characters in the storyline is introduced in the first half hour. And sometimes it catches me. I end up seeing the entire film, but
Hmm.
it's sometimes I can't do any more than this, but I can see how well they act. And there's, when you're nominated for something like that, you have to normally be very, I haven't seen anybody that was nominated that was bad. You have to be exceptional.
Yeah, and there's just everybody's got an opinion too. Like there are certain actors I won't name, of course, because they could be friends of yours. I don't know. Who I find unappealing, and I don't think they're particularly good at acting. But who am I? That's just my personal opinion. Who cares? But the good news is, writers who are listening, is
Mm-hmm.
there is probably somebody, or more than a few somebodies, who, if you write well at all, are going to like your stuff if they find it. And that's the good news.
Yeah. What I see, I mean, unless you're writing a textbook or, you're doing a documentary, and even those, I end up watching a lot of those because I figure I can use that. I could use that information, but you're not always going to be liked.
Yeah.
And people just want to go on a ride. They want to forget about their day and go into a fantasy line, something that's a fantasy that could take their mind away from everyday life. And so it fills the soul, not only as a writer, but as a listener and a reader.
Yeah.
There's something that just calms you for that little bit of time, or it gives you that aha moment.
Yes.
Sometimes I'm reading a book and I'm like, I've never looked at something in that perspective. This is really
I,
good.
I love it when I'm reading and I want to underline a passage. I mean, that when you just go, oh my God, how did they write that? Where did that come from? I've interviewed so many authors on Mysterious Goings On, and some of them I'm in awe of because they can just, I found those wonderful moments there. And by the way, you're no slouch in that department either with your books. And but and you know, I don't make notes in my books very often because I don't like to deface a book. I feel like it's really not defacing it, but I just put sticky notes on pages, and then I transcribe those to other things sometimes. But when you find those moments, when you find those ahas, and particularly if it's an artist who doesn't have a big following, but you're it's like you're in on this secret that nobody knows about, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I do. And some people they have such a great storyline, and then they don't, it just falls so short. And that's where I think the editor is so important.
Yeah, I
Like
agree.
I'm currently looking for an editor.
Mm,
Yeah, someone that works with poetry and short stories that understands that some of my stuff has a cultural influence,
hmm
Puerto Rican heritage, and I might use something about the Caribbean as an
hmm
idea, or I might use, there's a lot of voodoo or hoodoo and stuff like that in the Caribbean. So there's little nuances of my culture that weave in between. And so you need someone that sometimes understands that. And that's what I'm kind of looking for right now.
It's a tough find on. I don't even know editors who do poetry, to be honest with you.
They're hard to find.
Yeah, apparently. So if
Yeah.
listeners, help Sonia out if you know a really good poetry editor. Yeah, my editor, like if I showed up with poetry, he'd be like, "Go back. You're going down the wrong street." But I get that. I think that's one thing too, just to mention to writers who might be listening is I think self-publishing is great. I think independent writers are actually doing a lot of great stuff that you're not necessarily seeing in the mainstream. But I always just say this: please get a good editor to make sure, because it's like you said. I'll just relate this to you. Before I got my current editor, I was starting to, I think, in my series, really starting to repeat myself. And some people say, well, that's what Agatha Christie, that's Sherlock Holmes. There's all these things that they kind of repeated themselves every time. It was all these stories. It was this story beat, this story beat, this story beat, and you're done. But I didn't want to do that, and I was in that rut, and that's why my newer he's not new anymore. My gosh, he's edited the last 6 books, but he started saying, have you thought about this? Or my last book, when I said, I think I'm done. And he says, no, actually, you've just breathed new life in this whole series. He says, you can keep going because now we have this new villain. And I'm all like, I mean, it was nice to hear, but also it was not nice to hear because I kind of thought I was done with the series.
It's like, damn.
Damn. But I am taking a break after this one, Sonia. I am. I'm going to write something else. Did in a competition. I wrote a horror short story that won first place in a Wattpad thing, and I like writing horror and those kinds of suspense things, but not gore horror, not like that necessarily, but just paranormal horror and stuff like that. So I want to put John Pilate aside after this latest book comes out, which by the way it'll come out in October. I want to put him aside and write this horror novel that I've been meaning to write. I really want to.
Well, that's where your passion is going now. And that's what I think. We got to follow our passion. We got to follow our soul, because you don't want to get to the point where you're beating a dead horse.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've seen that. I've seen that with films. I've seen that with books. It's like, oh my God, it's dead. They should have not written that. And that's why you see a lot of like really famous TV shows, they stop at the high note because they know they really don't have that much more in them. And they rather stop.
Right. Breaking Bad quit at the right time, I think.
Yeah. Friends quit at the right time, and they were on forever.
I think MASH went on a few years too long.
Yeah. And I think Big Bang also cut at a good point. They cut at the number one.
Right.
And there's so many dramas that have, they just really cut at a high note, and you want more. So you could come back later. And I was hitting a lot of sitcoms, but because I like watching sitcoms, they make me laugh. I want to laugh when I watch TV, or I want to like think, but not have my stomach feel like it's a nuts because I just saw like the worst thing ever. I have a friend. I just wanted, when you were talking, she's a dramaturge, and she has Oscar winners, award-winning playwrights, and she can look at a story and tweak it no matter how good it is. And it's like, how does she even find something to change, to tweak? I mean, she's magical that way. So I always try, but she's very busy. So I always try to get my stuff to her. She doesn't do poetry. She says she has no mind for poetry. Right. But for my short stories, I always want to put it past her, because she can see a story, what works and what doesn't. And she'll just tell you, and she doesn't tell you how to write. She just tells you what she sees. She
helps you identify that great hook or whatever it is that your story needs to. Exactly. Oh man, those people, gosh, worth their weight in platinum.
Yes, really are. And her name is Sheree. I love her. A very good friend of mine, but she just happens to be amazing with that.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's good to have. That's really good.
So, Alex, what do you have in closing to help writers, or anything you want to share with the audience?
Oh boy, this is how original I am. I'll just tell you, it's probably something that you've heard a million times, but it happens to have the virtue of truth, which is, you've already said it and alluded to it several times. Write what you're into. Write what makes you happy. Write what fills you up. I can guarantee you, there's literally millions of people out there who need the same thing that you're producing. They want that. The trick, of course, is not, as they said, to change this. It's not freedom of speech; it's freedom of reach. The problem is just, do we have the reach to get it to those people? I like to believe that if we do a good job, eventually we're going to reach an audience. Like I have a small audience for my books. I'd love it to be bigger. I'm working on that. I know being on this show, my sales are going to go through the roof. Thank you, Sonia. I appreciate this
God
so
willing.
much.
And
You're
I'm
so
not religious.
and I'm not religious. But I would just say, do what fills you up. Don't get frustrated. I have so many first time writers who, or even not first time, but maybe who've been doing it for a while, who get just frustrated and they start seeing stuff that gets produced. Let's say books that get turned into films or whatever, and they're like, well, that's like my story, and it's no wonder my story doesn't get published and all that. And there may be similarities, there may be some truth to it, but you're going to get wound up around your own axle doing that. For one thing, you can't change it, right? Okay.
Right.
The second thing is, it's probably not as close to what you're doing as you think it is. It just seems that way. But I just tell people, do what fills you up. Keep going. It's okay to pause. It's okay to do something new. I love how you switch from poetry to short stories, and you're also thinking cinematically. I'm going to take a quick break when I'm done with this last book. And I'm going to maybe do a short story as a palate cleanser, and then I'm going to dive into the horror novel. That's my plan for the rest of this year. It's okay to do those kinds of things. So long answer, sorry, ramble on here, Alex, but just do what fills you up. And surround yourself with people like Sonia who are positive and loving and kind and funny, and who uplift you with their work. That's what I think that they should do.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to add something to what you just said, that you have to do what is within you. One of the things we're taught in acting is that a bunch of people are given the same sides. And for those of you that don't know what sides are where they take out a part of the script for the actor to perform, and it's your lines. Nobody can do the role like you. So don't come in just reading the lines, because we're all individuals. We all can be storytellers. We just have to pull the story out of us that's of our essence and of our knowledge, because nobody else is going to have that. So you're very unique in that way. Even though the premise might not be unique, the way you tell it is unique.
I took like 5 minutes, and you did that like in 25 seconds. I am in awe. Thank you.
Well, that's what they tell us actors to do. So it's like I've been hit over the head with it for 30 years, but it's true. You're the only one that can do it like you. So be you. And you do, like you said, you have to get it out there for people to see. So you have to do some kind of marketing, because no one's going to read your story if they don't know about it. You don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So, and now how can they reach you? Because I started rambling there.
I got it. I pulled you into my web. I made you do what I do. I'll tell you what, I have a couple of podcasts. Mysterious Goings On, probably the one that is closer analog to our audience here today. I have another one called PR After Hours. I'm a public relations guy by day. That's kind of my Clark Kent role. My writing is I like to think of as the superhero type with the cape. But Mysterious Goings On, you can go to that website, mgopod.com. And when you go there, there's all the stuff about the show. But if you're intrigued at all about my books, you can keep scrolling down when you get there. And you can order direct from me, autographed paperbacks. Or you can just go to amazon.com if you're interested in reading, and maybe for your Kindle or something, and get the John Pilate series. Just I don't know if Sonia, if you do links or not, but if Sonia doesn't do
I do links. So whatever links you want, you give me, I will.
Can I shoot you some links? How about we do that? And
you can shoot me some links, because I think it would be really interesting. I think people would want to read your books and see how you have that thread line, and especially the short story at the end. That's a really interesting way of doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. I will. So look in your show notes, and if Sonia gets them from me and gets a minute to put them in there, you can just click the links and you can do that. And I'll just close by saying that's one thing too, is that all authors need to make sure you have a little place online where people can find you, not just at Amazon, because there's some people who will not buy from Amazon because they like their independent bookstore. Yes. But the problem with your independent bookstore, guess what? They're usually small and can't afford to put every indie writer's or every writer's book on the shelf. So Amazon's a necessary evil. So again, mgopod.com, and there's another link. I'll give Sonia a link. I think I'll do so. I'll just give you a link to my author link on Amazon there, and if you click that, it's every book I wrote, including my nonfiction stuff. I just wrote a book on podcasting called The Podcast Option, which you can get there as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I love having you on the show. You are one of my favorite people. Blessings, and until we meet again. Thank you for listening to the Poetic Resurrection podcast. Please visit us and subscribe to our newsletter at poeticresurrection.com for the latest information and updates.